And no better way to get you ready for the return of Luka on Wednesday night. We bring in the man who wrote the book on Dončić in Dallas, Tim McMahon of ESPN. And yes, the book is The Wonder Boy. And the Wonder Boy looks like he's playing with some joy there, don't you think?
And look, he was emotionally devastated by this trade. It took him a while, obviously, to get healthy, but also to kind of get his feet under him on an emotional level. And the Lakers are rolling. He's playing for his buddy J.J. Redick, back with Dorian Finney-Smith. Him and LeBron are clicking. And looked like he had some fun in OKC, a place that not a lot of people have fun as visitors this season.
Yeah, well, the Mavericks have won there, though, right?
0-1 with Luka.
With Luka, though. That's
3-0
right.
with P.J. Washington.
That's exactly right. All right, let's talk about the book. The Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness. I'm going to take you back a couple of months when April Fool's Day came 2 months early on February 1st. Now, this is a book that Tim has been writing really for the last couple of years. Ever since Luka arrived in Dallas, he's been putting this thing together. And he had to write an additional chapter after the trade that happened on February 1st. The original copy of it, the last chapter on page 339 here, a quote from Dončić ends it. "This is the franchise that drafted me, and they gave me the keys. I'm just glad I'm here in Dallas." Well, Tim had to write another chapter. You had to be just shocked, and you had to work so hard the next couple of weeks to meet your publisher's new deadline.
Yeah, well, there was also some things going on with my day job for sure. And look, I was aware of how frustrated Nico Harrison in particular was with Luka, with the stuff like the conditioning, the diet, those sort of things. I was flabbergasted that it led to trading him, simply because, talking to dozens of executives, GMs, scouts around the league, nobody thought this was a good deal for the Mavericks. I have not spoken to a single person with another organization. The vast majority say you just cannot trade this type of generational talent as he's entering what should be his prime unless he has the proverbial gun to your head. There was friction between Luka and Nico, but he was happy in Dallas. He did not want to leave. There were a few who said, hey, I understand wanting to get out of the Luka business, for the reasons that we've discussed, but it was always followed with, but you have to maximize the return. And they did not do that. And part of the reason they did not do it was because they felt like they had to essentially stab Luka in the back and, completely blindside him, keep it silent. And in doing so, you could not create the biggest market, and you gave the Lakers leverage. The Lakers didn't even put everything they had available in the deal.
It's just amazing how you can go from the NBA Finals in Boston last June. And, Nico, as you say in the book, he talked to the team after that, the devastating loss of the NBA Finals, and wanted them to come back with the best version of themselves the next year. To 6 months later, Luka is now a Laker.
Well, and the game 3 of the finals really stuck in Nico's mind in particular through the summer. And they felt like Luka let down the franchise. Now, look. Do they get to the finals without Luka? Of course they don't. But Luka's flaws kind of bubbled to the surface in that game. And I didn't understand just how deeply that, lingered. And, Nico in particular felt like Luka didn't learn from that, didn't come back the best version of himself. He got hurt his calf again before training camp. It was a strain, although they didn't announce that. And then, the conditioning popped back up. Again, I knew the frustration. I'm still trying to wrap my head around. This is, at the time, was a 25-year-old, 5-time first-team All-NBA selection. There are very few people in the history of the game who were able to say that. And you decided to dump him months after he led you to the finals, after, by the way, leading the league in scoring and averaging, a little bit shy of a triple-double. It's the most shocking trade, at least in NBA history, and I would challenge you to come up with a more shocking trade in pro sports history.
You talk about the frustration with diet and conditioning, that sort of thing, and you also say in the book that Nico in particular was irate when Luka once again strained that calf on Christmas Day. And I wonder if that might have been the final straw as far as Nico is concerned, that to call up his buddy Rob Pelinka with the Lakers and say, let's work on something.
Well, that's definitely when things started going in action. And again, it wasn't, oh man, this is unfortunate, or sympathy towards Luka, or even feeling sorry for themselves. It was anger. It was, this is what happens when you don't take care of yourself. And look, if you talk to people with Luka's camp, they're like, hold on. This is what happens when you rush back from a calf strain in the preseason. This is what happens when you rush back from a heel contusion that he'd suffered the previous week, and he's playing on his tippy toes. The breakdown in the relationship between Luka and Nico was a major factor in this, and it was a non-existent relationship. And the breakdown in the relationship between Luka's team, his body team, his inner circle, and the Mavericks organization was also a factor in this. But Nico fired the people in the organization who worked well with those people, who were close with Luka. So, and
as you said in the book, Luka was like, well, you're firing all my friends.
Yes, they fired people because they were close to Luka. So obviously, I don't have to encourage people to look at Nico Harrison with a little bit of a scrutiny in the city. But it's merited.
All right, how about Mark Cuban? Of course, he sells the team. He 27% ownership, but at the time he was still in charge, or at least he said he was in charge of basketball operations. Clearly, that ended fairly quickly after the sale of the team.
Yeah, about when the ink was dry. And what Cuban is insisting now is that there was a gentleman's agreement, that he wasn't just flat out lying or trying to speak something into existence, which he's done before. And essentially, the gentleman's agreement wasn't followed up on. The important thing is this: Mark Cuban had no more say in basketball operations than any other rich guy who has courtside season tickets. If Mark Cuban had say, there is a 0.0% chance Luka Doncic would have ever been traded. I think Nico bringing that to Cuban, frankly, probably would have been a fireable offense. When Cuban was running the organization, the top priority was kissing Luka's butt. And you know what? I think that's a wise strategy. When you have that level of a superstar, you bend over backwards to try to keep him happy, to try to never let the thought of maybe leaving creep into his mind. It went from, smooching his backside for 5.5 years to stabbing him in the back in year 7.
All right, how about Anthony Davis in return? It's a shame Anthony Davis sort of gets thrown under the bus. Here's a 10-time All-Star. We saw in the limited time that he played his first game with the Mavericks what kind of impact he can have on a team. It's also a shame Kyrie Irving's gone down with an injury, so we can't see what this compilation of Mavericks might have been able to do this season. But Anthony Davis with the Mavericks has shown that he is Anthony Davis when healthy.
He's a top 75 all-time player. I mean, he's a first-ballot Hall of Famer. And I agree. He's been kind of trampled on because he is the face of the return for this trade that is just so hard to wrap your mind around. And look, he's 6 years older with his own durability history. Like, I get the criticism of the trade, and I think that's absolutely fair, but Anthony Davis is a heck of a player. But you know what? You're not going to see this team. Kyrie's not coming back, obviously, this year. We'll see what he's able to do when he's able to return next year. And in Nico Harrison's own words, he put together a time frame of 3 to 4 years where he's hoping they can be a championship team. You gave up a mid-20s perennial MVP candidate. So you gave up a decade-plus runway for 3 to 4 years after mortgaging the future in terms of draft capital successfully to build a contender around Luka.
All right, 30 seconds. What kind of scene do you expect on Wednesday night?
Surreal. It's going to be a circus. It's going to be a celebration of 6.5 spectacular years for Luka in a Mavericks uniform, and it'll be mourning from the fan base that it wasn't a lot more than that. I don't quite know what to expect from Luka. That wrath, we've seen it so many times. It's going to be an emotional night for him, and it will be very interesting to see how he channels that emotion.
All right, our thanks to Tim McMahon, ESPN. Up next, college basketball's national championship games. Again, it's the Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic, and the Curse of Greatness. It's available wherever books are sold. It is highly recommended. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.